Hello students, Mr. Riedl here. I am going to teach you the lesson about converting between percents, fractions, and decimals in our percents unit. So in this video, what you will learn is how percents, fractions, and decimals are all related and how you can convert between each one pretty quickly. Now this first example here is 100%. So 1 whole is 100%, and that's the same as 100 out of 100. So the cool thing about switching between percents, fractions, and decimals is that you can swap out the place value for each of the digits just based on what you know about the percent or the fraction or the decimal. And you can easily switch between each one. Now, a quick little bit of review first. There are many different ways of representing fractions. Some people use pie charts or pie graphs to represent fractions. Other people use squares like these, where you can see hundredths and tenths. Other people like to use groups and like parts of groups. But what I like to use is fraction strips, or also known as fraction bars. And oftentimes you might see fraction bars like this, but I'm going to use it in a rectangle up here like this. And the reason that I'm using fraction bar is because this is something that I see every day. When I look at my iPad, I see this bar in the corner of my iPad in the form of a battery level bar, like how much it's charged. And another reason that I like to use a rectangle is because it looks like a dollar bill, which I'm going to explain in just a moment. Now, what I want to show you is when I fill up this bar completely, I automatically think about 100% battery life on my iPad. When I have it fully charged, it is completely filled up. The battery life is at 100%. When it is filled up to 100%, this is the same as 1 whole. This is 1 whole. So 100% battery life is like 1 whole battery charge. You can also write 1 whole as 1.0. So it's important to remember that there is a decimal after the 1 when you're talking about 1 whole, because you can also write it as 1.0 or 1.00. Now, when I see 1.00, I automatically think about dollar bills. All you would need in front of this is a dollar sign, and it is $1. So it's 1 whole dollar. Or if you're thinking about iPad batteries, then it's 1 whole iPad battery charge. Now, speaking of a dollar, I want to talk about a dollar because of the fact that when we have a dollar, when we divide it into fourths, it is divided into quarters, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters make up 1 whole dollar. So what we have here is we have 4 quarters, but when you look at it as fractions or decimals, you can see how it changes. If you have 0 quarters, then you have $0, right? You have no money, 0 cents. If you have 1 quarter of a dollar, then you have 25 cents. If you have 2 quarters, that's half a dollar or 0.5 as a decimal or 50 cents. If you have 3 fourths, so that's 75 hundredths or 75 cents. And lastly, if we go back up to 1 whole dollar, we have 100 cents or $1 or 100% of a dollar, right? We have 1 whole dollar, 100 cents, 100%. So that is why I bring up the issue of monies, because it's very relevant when we're talking about percents, and that's even what percent means is out of 100, or 100 cents equals 1 whole, right? 1 whole dollar. But really, a lot of you are going to see battery percents a whole lot more often. 100% battery life, or 75% battery life, or 50%, or 25%. Or if you have 0% battery life, then you're probably not even watching this video anymore because your battery died and you don't have any more energy left to power your iPad. But the important thing to remember is that when we look at these fraction bars, they go along with the percents and decimals. So if we have 0% battery life on our iPad, then that fraction is also 0 and that decimal is also 0. So percent, fraction, and decimal all go together. So this is 0%. This is 25%, or 20 over 100, or 25 hundredths. This is 50%, or 50 out of 100, or 50 hundredths. And this is 75% battery life, or 75 out of 100, or 75 hundredths. And lastly, 100%, 100 out of 100, and 1 whole, 1.00. Okay, so after all that review, I have to say one more thing before we start working on some problems. For 100%, obviously the green bar is completely shaded in, right? Well, if we have fourths, then the fraction is not going to be 100 over 100 anymore. It's going to be 4/4, right? So 100 over 100, an equivalent fraction is 4 over 4. So I'm going to write here is 100 over 100 is equal to 4 over 4. So 100 divided by 100 is 1, 4 divided by 4 is 1, and it is the correct number of boxes shaded in. This is also equal to 10 out of 10. So the way I would write that is 10 tenths. So 10 tenths is equivalent to 4/4, which is equivalent to 100 over 100. 100 hundredths. All of these are equivalent to 1 whole because they're all shaded in. So as we go through the different percents, as the percents change, as we change our problems, I'm going to go through a whole bunch of problems and we're going to see all these different percents, all these different fractions, but they are all equivalent to each other because the percents, fractions, and decimals are all going to be equal. So the first problem here is, how do you write 34 hundredths as a percentage, or 34 over 100? So 34 hundredths as a percentage, this one's pretty straightforward because we know that percent means out of 100. So how many out of 100? Well, it's 34 out of 100. Now I'm going to draw a picture of what that looks like. So if this right here is about 50% right in the middle, and this is about 25% right here, then that must mean that 34 out of 100, 34% is a little bit past 25, but not quite up to 50. So I'm going to say that it's about to here. Okay, so let me shade this in. Okay, so this is a very rough estimate of approximately how much 34% is, but I know just by looking at this, because 34 out of 100 is the same as 34%, so I'm going to write 34%. And as you can see, I put them on the place value markers here for the percent. If it was 100%, if it was 100 out of 100, I would put 100, but because it's less than 100, it is, I'm not using the hundreds place, so that is left as 0, it's left blank. And then the 30 is the tens place and the 4 is the ones place. So I put that in the tens and ones place here and here. The fraction is already there, so I'm just going to put that right here. And the decimal, I don't actually need because it's not asking me for the decimal, but because I followed the tens place and the ones place for the fraction and the percent, I can do the same thing here. 0.34 or 34 hundredths is how you say that in word form. So 34 hundredths as a fraction, 34 hundredths as a decimal, and 34% as a percent. So what I would write for my answer using a percent sign is 34%. And as you can see, I'm going to do this for every single problem. I'm going to do a fraction, percent, and a decimal, and I'm going to draw it so you can see it in all these different ways. All right, next problem. How do you write 4/10 as a percentage? Okay, so this one is a little bit trickier because it is not out of 100, it's out of 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a picture and then I'm going to talk about these over here. Okay, so I drew my 10 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I cut this one hole into tenths because that's what the fraction is cut into, so it's tenths. Now I can't even put a fraction here yet because I need to find out what the equivalent fraction is over 100. So if I have tenths here, and I know that 4/10 is going to be equal to this, I have to figure out what is 4/10 equal to over 100. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade it in. Okay, so I shaded this in. 4 out of 10 pieces is shaded. That is the fraction. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about this, and I think, okay, well, it's not asking me out of 10 pieces, it's asking me out of 100 pieces for the fraction and the percent. What is it out of 100? So imagine if I took one of these tenths and I multiplied it by 10, then it would be 10 pieces instead of this one. So it would be 10 times 10. So this whole would be 100 pieces. So then I know it would be 10, 20, 30, 40. Okay, so what I did is I multiplied by 10. I multiplied the numerator by 10, and I multiplied the denominator by 10. So the number of total pieces was multiplied by 10, so I can now get 100. And I multiplied the number of shaded pieces by 10, and I get 40. So the fraction is now 40 out of 100. Now this easily lets me switch between fraction to percent. I can see that this is a little less than 50%, and it's more than 25%. So I know that this is 40% based off of the fact that it's 40 out of 100. And also for the decimal, I know that if the fraction is 40 out of 100, it's 40 hundredths. So that is what I write here, 40 hundredths. So the answer to the question, how do you write 4/10 as a percentage? Well, we just look right here, 40%. All right, next problem. How do you write 38% as a fraction? All right, well, I already have the percent, so let's fill this in. 38% as the fraction, that's what it's asking. So I know if this is the tens place and the ones place, then I just copy that in up here. 38 over 100, or 38 hundredths, is 38%. And I know when I say it in word form, 38 hundredths is the same as 0.38, or 38 hundredths. Now, if I were to draw a picture, this is what it would look like. It would look a little bit like this, because it would be 10, 20, 30, and then not quite to 40, because 38 is a little bit less than 40, so it'd be 38% right about here. So I would write that as a fraction, 38 over 100. Okay, so this next problem says, how do you write 90% as a fraction? All right, well, let me fill it in here for the percent. 90% as a fraction, I can just write it up here. Since percent means out of 100, it is 90 out of 100. And the decimal, what the decimal is, I can just copy the 90 down here. Something that you'll notice is that when I put 0.9, that's the same as 0.90. So what I can do is draw a picture of it, and it would be 9/10. The way you say this is 9/10. So that would look like this. And there it is. 9/10 is filled in. 9 out of 10 are shaded. And it's the same as 90 hundredths. If I split this into 100 pieces, it would fill in the exact same amount. So these all are equivalent. So I write it as a fraction. I could put it as 90 hundredths, 90 over 100. Or I could divide the top and the bottom by 10 and get 9/10. And that is equivalent as well. So either one as a fraction would be a correct answer for this. Next problem says, how do you write 10% as a decimal? Okay, so this goes into why we were talking about decimals. So 10% as a decimal, I'm going to write it as a percent first. 10% as a fraction, it looks like this. 10 over 100. And we know that we can just copy this number down here into the place values. Tenths and hundredths. So we have 0.10 as a decimal. This is the same as 0.1. And this is what it would look like as a fraction, because 1 out of 10 is 10%, because 10 divided by 10 is 1, and 100 divided by 10 is 10. So 10 over 100 is the same as 1 over 10. These are equivalent. They represent the same amount. So as a decimal, it could be either 10 hundredths or 1/10. Both would be correct. Next problem. How do you write 52% as a decimal? Percent looks like this. The fraction looks like this. And the decimal looks like this. 0.52. And as a visual, it would just go a little bit past 50%, or 5/10, because it is 2 hundredths past 50%. 2 hundredths past 5/10. So that would be the answer, 0.52. This is where it becomes a little bit more tricky. How do you write 0.3 as a percentage? So 0.3 as a decimal is written like this. But we need to remember that when it's 0.3, that is the same as 0.30, because 3/10 is the same as 30 hundredths. The way that we can prove that is when we write equivalent fraction by knowing that 3/10 by multiplying by 10 on the top and bottom equals 30 over 100. So these are equivalent. And when I draw a picture, this is what it looks like. 3 out of 10 are shaded, 3/10, and this is going to equal 30%. So I write that as my answer, 30%. All right, so for the rest of the problems that I'm going to show you examples of, they are all more than 100%. It says, how do you write 124 over 100 as a percentage? 124 hundredths is more than 100%. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw you a picture so you can understand what that means exactly. Okay, and when I say I'm going to draw you a picture, I mean I'm going to copy and paste a picture here so that it's easier. Okay, so this one on the left plus this one on the right. All right, so the one on the left is 100% because it's completely shaded in, and also 100 over 100, same thing. And what we're going to do is we're going to add that to something on the right. So 100% plus, this is 24%. And when I add those two together, then I get 124%. So that is what I write right here. Now, when it comes to fractions, like what is given up here, it is pretty much the same thing. 100 over 100 plus 24 over 100, like we have here. So that goes up here for the fraction. So now we are starting to use the hundreds place more than just the tens and the ones place. So 124 out of 100. So I just copy these down here to the decimal, and I have my decimal, 1.24, 1 and 24 hundredths. So write it as a percent. There you go, 124%. All right, so the next problem is also more than 100%, but it's written as a fraction in halves. How do you write 5 halves as a percentage, or 5 over 2? This is what it looks like. So this is 1 whole, or 2 halves, plus another whole, or 2 halves, plus 1 more half, equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 halves. So we have a total of 5 halves. Now we could just see that this is 100% plus 100% plus 50% equals 250%. But I also want to fill in the fraction and the decimal part too. So the question is, how do I get from 5 halves to something over 100? Well, I could see, yeah, it's going to be 250 over 100. But how do I get to that? By doing the equivalent fractions. The way that I would do that is I would do 2 times something equals 100. So I know that 2 times 50 equals 100. So that must mean that I have to multiply the top by 50 as well. And it is indeed correct. 5 times 50 equals 250. So the fraction is 250 over 100, or simplified to 5 halves. And the decimal would be 2.50, or that's the same as 2.5. So as a percent, all that to say, the answer is 250%. Next question, how do you write 443% as a fraction or mixed number? Okay, so as a visual, 443% is 4 times 100 plus a little more. That would be 1, 2, 3, 400%, 100 times 4, plus a little bit more, which is 43%. So I already have the percent, 443%, and then I just take those digits and put them up here. 443 over 100, and the decimal is 4.43. Now the question is asking, how do you write it as a fraction or a mixed number? So as a fraction, it would just be like this, 443 over 100. But as a mixed number, what we can do is we can divide the numerator, by the bottom number, the denominator. And we could do that using long division, like by doing 443 divided by 100, and then see how many times 100 goes into 443. But why do that when we have the answer already right here? This is the whole number as a mixed number. We have 4 whole, and down here we have the fraction that goes with it, 43 hundredths. So the answer could be 4 and 43 hundredths, since this can't be simplified anymore. That would be the mixed number, and that is equivalent to 443 over 100, which is the fraction. So either one of these would be acceptable as an answer. This one is also more than 100%. How do you write 1.96 as a percentage? For the sake of time, I'm just going to skip the pictures since I've done a bunch of those, and I'm just going to fill out the rest of this so that you can see how quick it can go without drawing pictures. 1.96 as a decimal is the same as 196 over 100, which is also the same as 196%. And that is the answer. Next question. How do you write 1 31/100ths as a percentage? Well, it's just as quick. 1.31 is a decimal. That is equivalent to 131 over 100, which is equivalent to 131%, which is the answer. All right, last question. How do you write 290% as a decimal? Okay, so this one has a 0 on the end, so this one slightly tricky. There are two answers, though. The percent was already given to us. 290% is the same as 290 over 100, which is also the same as 2.90. However, there are two answers because remember, when there's a 0 on the end here in the hundredths place, 2 and 90 hundredths is the same as 2 and 9/10. 2.9 is the same as 2.90. So either of those answers are correct. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for watching. And that is how you convert between percents, fractions, and decimals. And you can also see how they are all related with the equivalent fractions and the decimal places and the whole numbers. And I hope that made a little bit more sense to you, seeing all those visuals and seeing how they are corresponding to one another in that trifecta, percent, fraction, and decimals triangle. Have a good day. See you later.